Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us. We're just going to do a quick round of introductions for our participants today, and then we'll hear from each of our panelists, and then have plenty of time for Q&A. So save up those questions, put them in the chat. Think about what you want to know. Anyway, my name is Daniel Harrigus. I am in St. Paul, Minnesota. I'm the policy director at PRN. And my background is in urban planning. I've been a writer for a long time, worked for Strong Towns, been interested in these issues around school transportation and sort of the broader problems with car dependency that they really just embody for a long time. And now I have two little kids, so it touches me really personally. I want to ask all of our participants as they introduce themselves, whether you have kids, and if so, how do they get to school? We're enjoying some crisp fall weather here in Minnesota, so I e-biked both of my kids to school today. Normally, my preschooler and I ride the bike, and my kindergartner takes the yellow school bus. So let's go to Natasha next.
Hi all, I'm Natasha. I am currently in Seattle, Washington, and I use she, her pronouns. I'm with Safe Routes Partnership. We're a national nonprofit that originally started with Safe Routes to School about 20 years ago, getting it into federal policy with federal funding. And since then, we found that the things that safely get kids and their families to and from school also get a lot of people to the daily destinations they need to get to. And so I do a lot of different things. But Safe Routes to School is really at the heart of our organization. So I'm really happy to be talking about that. I do not have kids. However, I am the proud member of the Orca Bike Pod, which is our local bike bus to the elementary school in my neighborhood. And so I get to go every Wednesday in the Orca Bike Pod. And so I get to kind of experience like the parents coming in every so often and talking with them about what it's like to, like realize, oh no, we might need another car. We don't necessarily want one. And just like sort of like the negotiations that happen around the logistics of parenthood and kids in our modern world. So I really it's a joy to be part of. And then I can pass it on to Emily.
That's great.
Great. Thanks to Parking Reform Network for hosting this discussion, and thank you all for joining. I'm Emily. I'm a housing economist at the Mercatus Center at George Mason University. And as you'd expect, most of my work is on housing policy, looking at things like how zoning rules and other land use approval permit processes and building codes affect how much and what type of housing can get built where and housing affordability. But I'm starting to get interested in this issue of school siting, and I'll be talking about a little bit of the early research that I've done on this topic, working with Yona Freemark at the Urban Institute. And one reason that I've gotten interested in this topic is because of my kids. I have twins who are 4 and a daughter who's almost 2. And they're not in school yet, but once we start them in preschool shortly, they'll be going by foot there with either my husband or me. But once they start kindergarten, we live in one of the densest neighborhoods in the DC metro area, but our zone school is 2 miles away. So it's overall a very walkable neighborhood. But from the school perspective, it's really not. We're hoping that we'll get into a lottery school that would be a pretty pleasant bike commute and go by cargo bike, at least at first. But if we end up at our quote unquote neighborhood school, I'm not exactly sure what we'll do transportation wise, and we'll have to figure that out. Thanks. I'll hand it over to Sam.
Hi, everybody. I'm Coach Sam Balto. Formerly, but I also still consider myself a physical education teacher. I now am the co-founder and ED of Bike Bus World. We're a nonprofit to support more people starting bike buses and help build the community and the movement. I have 2 kids, 7 and 5. I feel like how we get them to school is always changing because their schools are always changing as they get older and just transitions. So one of my sons now takes the school bus, which he really enjoys. And my other son, we do sort of variety. My wife drives or will bike, and sometimes he will bike as well. But on the way home is always a little difficult because it's uphill versus downhill. And so we're still working on building that strength and grit to make it up the hill, with his little legs. But still, he rode once. I want to say it's like 3.5 miles home from preschool, which like thinking about that is I can't imagine. I don't even know how old I was when until I like biked 3.5 miles anywhere. So he's way ahead of where I was. So things are looking up.
Awesome. Thank you all for being with us today. We're going to move on to initial kind of presentations here. This is maybe one of the most eclectic panels that PRN has done in a while. But it's such an important topic that really, really touches people, and we kept hearing that people wanted to hear about it. So, and this is not a discussion that's narrowly about parking, though, of course, it's not about that because everything is about parking. On some level, all of land use is about parking. But like the rest of our work at PRN, this is about how designing our world and our routines around prioritizing access for cars sometimes results in a world that's really hostile to getting around in any other way. And so I think school transportation is such an obvious entry point to this conversation because it's a very universal experience. And kids are the largest group of non-drivers in our society. So they're really profoundly affected by the creation of a world where, frankly, it sucks to be a non-driver. Um, and so it's fall, and you've all probably seen the annual flood of news stories about insane car pickup lines where parents wait for an hour or an hour and a half or 2 hours. School buses running 2 hours late or failing to get kids to school at all. We're seeing more of that. There was a story that I reported on in the past out of Louisville where the bus system just catastrophically failed in the fall to the point where they had to cancel school for 2 days. There's just more, I mean, there's sort of a universal sense that like this is extremely broken right now. Um, and so we've assembled three experts on how school transportation broke and what it could look like to fix it from three very different angles. Um, anyway, we'll hand it over to our panelists, and I encourage you all to engage in the Zoom chat with your comments and questions. We'll have time for Q&A at the end for sure. So I'm going to turn it over first to Natasha.
Fabulous. Thank you. I have a little deck, and can you guys see it? All good? Perfect. Okay. Um, First of all, thanks so much for having me. I think about parking all the time. And my presentation is a little bit more of like the big picture around like what could it look like if we were kind of thinking about the fact that fewer kids are walking and biking and more parents are driving. So in 1969, just to give you some stats, we had nearly 50% of kids in the US walking or biking to school. And then within a mile radius of schools, that number went up to about 90%. And today, the number of kids walking and biking to school is less than 15%. That's 50 to 15% after just one generation. And for kids being driven to school, it used to be 15%, and now it's up to 44%. And so during the morning traffic commute, driving to school represents about 10 to 14% of all traffic on the road. And so as we're thinking about this, as traffic's increasing, parents and caregivers are becoming a little bit more convinced that it's a little bit more unsafe for children to walk. They begin driving their kids to school, and then that's adding to in this like kind of vicious cycle of adding more and more cars to that morning chaos. Like I personally was driven to school because my mom was like, "Oh my gosh, I'm not going to send you out there." Like, because there's so many cars. And I think the big question is, or it should be, is this what we want for our lives? Do we want to be in these car lines? Do we want to normalize this for young people and continue this trend toward less walking and biking? And for me, and for so many people across the country, the answer is no. We want to lean into the joy and the freedom and the incredible benefits of having transportation options for walking and biking, but also taking the bus and like just being able to choose. That's where Safe Routes to School comes in. And Safe Routes to School is this very research-backed movement to make it easier for kids to walk, bike, and roll to and from school. And it comes with a host of benefits that are not just for kids and their caregivers, but they also sort of seep out into the whole community. This change to kind of the culture and the roadway network, like, physically, it can facilitate safe walking and biking and rolling throughout this whole network in the community. And there's tons of strategies for this work. There's much like tons of examples for work that's being done in urban, suburban, and rural communities. So this works everywhere. And Safe Routes to School is this comprehensive, data-driven, equity-centered approach. And this is just like the 6 E's that we usually talk about to frame our work. And so we center engagement and equity, and we're thinking about encouragement for getting people to walk and bike. We're thinking about engineering improvements, so thinking like sidewalks, features that slow down traffic, lighting, education, so that kids know how to properly ride and how to, do the helmet fit, and they can practice in school. And I'm sure Coach Balto will talk about this a little bit more. And evaluation to make sure that we're addressing the right problems, like what actually is the barrier and what impact are these efforts having. And so, for example, this is me at Walk, Bike, Roll to School Day. Not next week, this week, this Wednesday is another National Walk and Roll to School Day. And schools across the US are planning really fun events that show people what is possible if we get out of our individual cars on the way to school. And I think it's really important to note in relation to kids that these experiences, if like they might not be doing this with their families, but school is an opportunity for every kid to get to experience what it's like to do a little bit more walking and biking. And that can set the course for them as adults. Like knowing that this is an option, kids who walk and bike to school are more likely to continue that habit as they age and be less car dependent and less parking dependent adults. And there's so many research-backed benefits for this work, and I can definitely like share more materials so you can look at this more closely, including academic performance, community connection, health, safer streets. But 2 stats that I personally really like are that 2 studies have come out recently studying schools across multiple states, and they show a 35 to 45% increase in walking and biking as a result of Safe Routes to School programs. And then the second one is that I think it was 2 more studies in the last 2 years showing a reduction in injuries near schools. And this is not just for kids, this is also other adults. And that is in the range of 45 to 75% decrease near schools. And so this is something that's helping the entire community, not just schools. And just as sort of an intro to like where I'm coming from, we advance policy change. We catalyze support via a network of more than 800 partner organizations working toward making it safer for in communities to walk and bike. And we're working with policymakers. We're working with grassroots supporters. We have really deep expertise in national, state, and local level work to propel this movement. And this is just a little screenshot of a report card. We were actually talking as the panelists about a report that we put out every 2 years about how every state is supporting walking and biking. And one of those things is school siting, but there's also funding stuff. And so this is a really cool resource on our website that I can share a link to, and you can check out your own state and see what other states are doing too. And then finally, like, what does that actually look like? We develop plans like Safe Routes to School. I also work on Safe Routes to Park stuff, so thinking about other everyday destinations, securing funding from federal, state, and local sources, and then how do we actually implement? How do we do this? And sharing and connecting people, like getting people into a community to know that they're not alone in this work. And so one example is that we have a summit, a virtual summit this month in October, which I can share a link to. We have a volunteer rate. So if you're interested in that to learn more about Safe Routes to School. And then we also have a very active Safe Routes to School Google group, which is just a really cool club of people sharing ideas and questions that come up in their work. So it's very active and fun to be in. And that's it for me. That's the intro. This is my email, Natasha at Safe Routes Partnership. Feel free to email me if you have questions about this or how to sort of plug in.
Thanks, Natasha.
Yeah.
We'll hear from Emily next.
Awesome. Thank you. So I'll just talk a little bit about my early research on what are some of the land use factors that are driving the changing transportation trends that Natasha talked about. So why is it that the number of kids walking, biking, and even taking the bus to school has plummeted? And one of the big factors is where schools are built and what types of sites they are located on over time. And the recent trend toward schools that are just harder to get to for kids who are getting there by any way other than being driven by their parents. Looking at a random sample of schools across the country, we found that since before World War II versus after World War II, the typical size of an elementary school site has more than doubled from about 5.5 acres before World War II, being the typical elementary school size, to 13.5 today. And so it's just necessarily difficult to find sites that are available and affordable for school districts who are looking at building new schools that are going to be of these large sites. So therefore, schools tend to get built at greenfield sites that are just difficult for kids to get to, especially on foot. And this can also have be start of a trend a start of a trend toward new development in a new greenfield location. So as school districts are working with their municipalities to get roads, utilities out to these new sites, that might also like kind of lay the ground for new greenfield residential development when that development may have happened in a different location without that school investment. And there are a lot of different factors that have led to schools getting bigger over time, but one of them is likely state guidelines or mandates that require their school districts to build on large sites. And for those of you, the parking nerds, probably just about everyone on the call today, you might be familiar with the Institute of Transportation Engineers that was influential in leading localities to adopt parking requirements for different types of sites. In the school facility world, there's a similar organization called that was originally called the National Council on Schoolhouse Construction that started in 1929, recommending that states require larger sites for schools than what had been the historical norm in order to allow schools to have the space for playgrounds, athletic fields, and other types of facilities. And of course, parking. They changed their name to the Council of Educational Facility Planners International in 1964. And interestingly, in the early 2000s, they really pivoted from recommending that states require large sites for schools to recommending basically the exact opposite, that school districts should be allowed to build schools on sites that work well for them, factoring in accessibility for kids in those decisions. And across some states, there's definitely been buy-in to this different approach and a desire to make it possible for schools to be built in infill locations and in places where kids are going to be able to walk, bike, or take the bus to school. But reform has been difficult. There have been a couple of states, including South Carolina, that have looked at actively trying to allow smaller, more walkable school sites to be developed. But basically, it hasn't worked so far, at least in the studies of these reforms that we have available at this time. And I think there are a couple reasons. One is probably just parents and school districts want these, are used to these big facilities, think that they want them, that kids want them, having athletic fields and whatnot all at one site. But interestingly, as we have school sites that are really intended to facilitate physical activity, we're seeing kids getting less physical activity than ever before, partly because their day-to-day transportation is generally not active. Another piece of the path dependency, I think, is the industry of people who design and build schools being used to the way we've done things since World War II. So finding um, consultants and architects and contractors who are willing to work in a different mode might be a challenge for some school districts. Um, and then the last thing I want to point out is that while I personally am very bought into the idea of number one, active transportation to school, and number two, just a general approach of having more free range kids in general who have more autonomy and freedom to move about their worlds on a day-to-day basis. It is, I think, certainly worth keeping in mind that since the rate of kids walking and biking to school has plummeted, we've also seen a huge decrease in the number of kid fatalities in due to walking and biking, not just to school, but walking and biking in all kinds of scenarios. So I think as we're thinking about enabling schools that can be built in more walkable or bikeable locations, it's absolutely crucial to keep in mind the work that folks like Natasha and Coach Balto are doing to ensure that we're enabling walking and biking in as safe a way as possible. Thanks. Look forward to the discussion, and I'll turn it over to Coach Balto.
Thanks so much. This is like the panel I've been waiting for, like the discussion I've been waiting for. It's like all of these components put together, and definitely Emily, like keep going down this rabbit hole of schools and land use and all of that, because somebody's got to figure it out and sort of crack that nut to share the information with all of us. Um, so yeah, I was a physical education teacher, doing lots of different things, walking school buses, traffic gardens. In a moment, I'll share a really cool school parking related project we did a couple years ago. But 3.5 years ago now, I did my first bike bus, and it was a huge success. We had over 10% of our kids participate, and we've been doing it every Wednesday since, and it's grown, and we've had some rides with over a third of the students participating. Um, and it's helped spark more and more people starting bike buses and walking school buses in their community. It's allowed me to leave teaching to create Bike Bus World to support more people starting bike buses and to help grow the movement. And I think you know, the work that, Safe Routes to School Partnership does is absolutely amazing. And I kind of see Bike Bus as this tool to help build the base, just bring more people into the movement and help sort of guide them to all these amazing resources that are existing. And hopefully turn them into people who care about school land use and school parking lots, because they all play a part. But bike bus has definitely been this thing that's been able to spark people's imagination. We had Justin Timberlake join our bike bus ride on Friday. We had Benson Boone join our bike bus ride. So it's been really amazing to see. I'm going to share my cool project that I did at one of the schools I was teaching at. This is a school, Cesar Chavez um, Elementary, and in North Portland. This is not the school I was teaching at doing the bike bus, but we did a walking school bus. And you can see the school parking lot is a fifth of the school campus. And I honestly think it's more than a fifth, because I feel like the playground is like it's just a really massive, field. So this parking lot takes up a lot of space. And it was this really cool, like gradual process over the 2, 3 years that I was there. And first was there was four entrances to the parking lot. And so first what we did was close off one of the entrances. And so it was like a couple parents, like a handful of parents started getting signatures. We presented it to the principal, and we then closed it. And I think the thing that's really cool about parking lots is you don't need the city involved. You just need the principal. And so it really is this untapped place to just get stuff done. Because the city can be soul crushing and, wanting to smash your head into the wall. But the principal, you can move much easier. And so we closed off one of the entrances. Then we got I think it was like America Walks grant, and we did some mural painting. And just to sort of get the community to sort of see the parking lot differently. And so we painted this really cool butterfly mural in the parking lot. And then we had this big issue with parents still driving in and idling, and it absolutely drove me nuts how like these parents were idling while the middle school bus kids were standing there, and it just really created this, I don't know, almost like hierarchical, like we're in our car while you bus kids are inhaling our pollution sort of thing. And it's like, this is so silly. This is like not cool. And I sort of thought like the bus kids' parents don't have somebody there like standing up for them. So I felt like, that was kind of our duty. Let me go to the next slide. So because we had 4 entrances, we closed one. Then the next year we closed 2 more. So now there was only 1 entrance. Made it a little bit less convenient, or a lot less convenient to come in and out. And so what we did is we created a Thrive Zone. And so during the morning drop-off time, no cars were allowed to move in this green area. And it's sort of this thing, it's if parents were allowed to drive into the school building and drop their kids off in front of their children's classroom, they would. But similarly, if there was a 1/4 mile radius around the school with no car movement, parents would happily drop their kid off a 1/4 mile away and have their kid walk or scooter or bike, because the issue is cars. And naturally, being a good parent in America is to remove as many and all unsafe, uncomfortable experiences for our children. And so if one parent's going to drive closer and put your kid in danger, then you're going to drive as close as they're going to go. And so you just make it even. You make it equal for everyone, and no cars are moving, no kids are getting put in danger, and it's like a win-win. And now you have so much more open area for families to drop the kids off. Parents don't have to wait and idle. And kids get a little more fresh air and physical activity. And so this is the before and after. Bada bing, bada boom. Look at that. And so parking lots, school parking lots. Let's go.
Love it. Thank you so much. Thanks to all of our panelists. We're gonna have some time here for Q&A. So again, yeah, attendees feel free to either write a question up in the chat or use the raise hand feature in Zoom. Here, I'm gonna put my Zoom on gallery mode so I can see hands that are raised. And I got some questions I can sprinkle in here as well. But I see one hand up already. So Davida, feel free to unmute and ask.
Thanks. Thanks everybody for your presentation so far. It's really inspiring. I'm wondering, as the parent of 2 teenagers, and one teenager who got his license and he knows how to drive, but he doesn't have a car, and we're not getting him a car, and our daughter would like to learn how to drive. I'm just curious what everybody thinks about kind of this next level, because I think a lot of this stuff is focused on the little kids. And what does Safe Routes to School, do you encourage? What do I want to say? I guess I'm wondering if you've been able to track, like, is there a connection between kids who participate in Safe Routes to School? Are they more likely to just continue with biking and walking and busing? Or is the pressure from America being so car-centric too strong that they're going to default to, well, they want to drive like all the rest of their friends?
Just from my perspective, I think I heard a stat the other day that was like, I don't know what the exact number was, but it was if kids grow up walking and biking, they are more likely to walk and bike as adults. I think the person I was talking to was like, it's 7 times more likely. And the thing is like teens are gonna want to do whatever they want to do. But what I can say from the perspective of like Safe Routes to School programming, one, high school, middle and like high schools are now newly eligible for safe routes to school funding from like a federal funding perspective. So that's a newer thing within the last few years, which is exciting. And two, there's really cool ways to engage teenagers in the work, whether that is sort of taking on leadership roles to help out the younger kids or doing some kind of volunteering project and like, you know, like smaller scale organizing. And uh, we have really cool resources on that around engaging older youth and uh, getting them to understand that like this is one way of taking action in your world. So I would say like don't count it out. Um, I don't know. What would other people say?
Yeah, I got a lot to say on that. I think one, there's a lot of research or stats coming out that the number of kids choosing driving or is like decreasing significantly. And in some ways that's good, and in some ways that's bad. And I'll explain why. Like it's good, less cars on the road, less kids whose frontal lobe hasn't fused, in huge cars. But it's bad because kids have really lost independence and their confidence to exist in the real world without everything being, all barriers and uncomfortable situations being removed. By their parents. And so I really think it is more of an issue of children's like independence, autonomy, and mental health than it is maybe their issues with the car, even though it's probably something of the both. But I think, as a teacher, you always think of this word scaffolding. If you want your kid to be, a functioning human being by the time they get out of your house at 18, like what steps do you need to put in as they, get older? And I think something that's been really great about the bike bus is that this emphasis on doing it consistently, and consistently doesn't mean daily. It means as consistently as the volunteers can consistently do it, but that really helps refine and build the children's competence and confidence. And when you're confident in a skill, you're going to do it more. And so, that's where you practice the skills, over and over again. And then you're like, whoa, I feel really good riding my bike. Let's go other places as well. And so high school is it's a different dynamic, and I wish you the best of luck because that's crazy. But like, um, yeah, you got to kind of like plan ahead for these things. Not that you didn't.
I see a question here from Ariel Beerbaum who said, I'm curious if you can speak to issues of racial and socioeconomic segregation slash desegregation. And that for some people, walking to a school in a high poverty segregated neighborhood is not desirable. And likewise, attending a school further away is the best option, even if it precludes walking and biking. So how do each of you think about your active travel work in light of these tensions?
Yeah, I'll jump in with that one. I mean, I think there are a lot of problems with the US general norm of having kids go to school based on where they live. Tons of problems in terms of both just general segregation and lack of opportunity for lower income kids, but also like fewer options for specialization if we want to have things like art based schools or science based schools or whatever that might serve a smaller population of kids really well. It's just really difficult to do that if everybody is going to a narrowly geographically targeted school. The one really huge benefit of neighborhood-based schools should be that they are relatively easier for kids to get to independently. And we're seeing that even that one benefit has really fallen apart in recent decades as most kids are no longer doing that. So I don't think it's necessarily true that having neighborhood based schools should be the ultimate goal because of some of these concerns. But certainly we do want at least those kids who are going to schools within a reasonable distance of where they live to have the option of getting themselves there.
Yeah, and I think that's sort of my take too, is that, proximity does matter when it comes to walking and biking ultimately. And so just making sure that every school, at least you have the option, right? So
Yeah, I think I used to teach in Boston. I taught in Roxbury, and I lived in Roxbury, and it's very interesting. Boston has this history of busing, and to desegregate schools, and I personally don't think it was terribly successful. And now you have children going on school buses across town for 45 minutes to an hour when they're passing multiple other mediocre schools that are closer. um, the busing takes up a tenth of the school district budget. It's over like $125 million. And so you can think, like, if that money was redirected to neighborhood schools, that's a lot of staff and services that could be better served. And then I think also, like, sure, if you have the privilege of choice in where you send your kid to school, like, by all means, but like, there are kids whose parents don't have that choice, and we should be doing everything we can to ensure that those kids have the best experience, like, to the school that they go to, but also the safest experience getting to school.
yeah. And then what I heard, and tell me if I'm wrong here, that there was another thread in that question about just like sense of safety on the way to school. And I think that's a really core part of Safe Routes to School programming, is just like, well, first of all, leading with equity, understanding like what are the challenges that children and their families are facing on the way to school. And street harassment, sense of safety. There's a lot of really cool examples of ways that like getting eyes on the street, getting groups of people thinking about safety in the neighborhood, and like where's like danger, there's like sense of safety. There's like, I think there's a lot of really cool work happening through Safe Routes to School work. And so I would sort of elevate that if that is a concern. Um, I definitely have resources around thinking about safety.
Yeah, I think it's also just as like parents are like, oh, I drive my kid because it's not safe. And you're like, okay, but like there's kids whose parents can't drive them or walk them. So like what are we doing for those kids and their sense of safety? And so I think really remembering the like my priority is like the kid who doesn't qualify for the bus, who doesn't have a parent who can walk or drive them to school, or a neighbor who can take them, and they're just sort of left to the wolves. They're like the silent suffering is sort of the term that I've read and used. And so it's like those are the kids that we need to be prioritizing and making sure that that trip is safe. And I don't think that means drive, like paying for personal Uber drivers. I don't think that's the answer. And so, we got to do things like Natasha was saying, like more eyes on the street, walking school buses, like issues with ICE that are going on right now. In DC, there was an article in the Post about like communities organizing walking school buses to help address that. Or in South Africa, they organize walking school buses to deal with gun violence.
Great insights. Yeah. Um, this is such a fascinating topic because I'm just like my brain is spinning out all these different threads as all of you talk. Where like everything is so interconnected here in ways that you cannot easily pull apart, and interconnected with these broader histories beyond any question of just narrowly what are our policies around schools or school transportation to just how do we design our communities. But it feels like a piece of this is the geographic question of where are we investing educational resources, and what are the levers at the district and at the state level for that too. Where are we building the high quality schools? Where are they concentrating? Why is that? I mean, there are deep reasons for, down to the taxation system for this, but I've certainly heard it suggested that one of the most powerful things you can do to actually support, historically disinvested, disadvantaged neighborhoods is put a really good school in that location that is going to bring in kids from higher opportunity residential areas. And then have that school not be an isolated campus, but have it be an anchor in the broader neighborhood. And maybe I know we had another hand up. I want to get to that too. I think another tangential issue here that I just wanted to raise was, and this came up a little bit in the chat with the question of extracurriculars, that I think we've seen this part of the feedback loop here is this cultural shift toward schools needing to encompass all these functions unto themselves that maybe historically they didn't. You know, the idea that you've got all this space for every extracurricular for the athletics program for da 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 da. Like, you know, anecdotally, St. Paul is full of pre-World War II elementary schools where when the kids go out for recess, they use the neighborhood park playground. And outside of school hours, neighborhood kids are using the same playground. And when the school baseball team goes out and they play in the neighborhood park. And the school is just really, really integrated into the broader fabric of the community in a way that, I mean, it seems like that's part of the expectations that we're putting on schools here. If we can maybe start to unbundle some of these things that historically have been broader community functions. Um, anyway, these are big questions, and there are a lot of different angles from which to kind of start pulling at one thread or another. I know. Felicity, I saw your hand up before.
Yeah, so I just actually had a question about fundraising in general for the yellow school buses, since we haven't really talked about that. In Texas, we are seeing dramatic cuts to overall funding for education, which I think is the case in several of the red states. And one of the things that has been targeted almost intentionally is school bus funding. So we've actually we just had 15 schools that are going to close here in Austin because of they don't have enough funding, A, and B, some of those are based on school bus access and getting kids into those schools where, especially when walking and biking isn't sort of available. And to me, this also speaks to the need to having bigger campuses and where they're located. All of that's intertwined, trying to like having a better school bus system supports maybe better land use decisions, et cetera, et cetera. So I guess I'm just curious if you think that there's an effort or could be an effort to actually get this federal government in particular, but also states to step up and refund bus levels at the same level they were probably 10 or 15 years ago. And then B, I've seen some of the kind of angst on some social media went out is that certain parents pay for school bus services, which is not the case in Texas or in most Texas districts. So I'm just curious, like, if you all have thoughts about how do we fund a better school bus system across the board?
I think it's so tricky because, your kids are like in school for a short period of time. And then you kind of move on and change takes a long time. And so by the time you sort of like put the pieces together, they're already almost out. Um, but I think it's just generally like bringing more attention to the issue of student transportation. I just, as a teacher, I just saw how impactful it was having bus duty and school car line duty and crossing guard duty, and then doing my first walking school bus. I was like, what are we doing here, people? Like, this is the best thing in the world. Like, this solves so many of our problems. And it's like, I jokingly say, like, I want to be the Robert Moses without the racism of like student transportation. It's like, yeah, like, like, you could make an argument for every single one of the president's cabinets that like student transportation and making our policies focused on walking and biking should be a matter of national security. It's good for like every single layer. And so hopefully we can find, someone in the federal level who really cares about this and is galvanized by it, because nobody's thriving with these school car lines. Like nobody is buying a house based off of like, yeah, I want to send my kid to that school because that school car line is awesome. And I think also just like school staff, like the amount of money, like staff time, like our principal is like principals making, going to school for all these years are having to like put together like school car line plans. Like that's ridiculous. That's such an immense waste of resources when like kids are reading at like 5 grade levels lower.
Yeah. Basically, I have seen school pickup and drop off radicalize people to active transportation more than any other topic, I think. Just like the regular person. It's pretty wild.
My big fear though is like people then just go to homeschooling versus like mode shifting, and you know that's like, I think that's where like bike bus and walking school bus is this very tangible thing we can do to sort of buck the trend of everybody driving their kids to school. And I mean, we're seeing it in Portland, but all over the country and the world, like leaders are paying attention to this issue, and it shows this unmet, the latent demand for active transportation. Like it's in our genetic code to be physically active and socially connected. It is not in our genetic code to be isolated in a car, sitting by ourselves in boxes, with everybody else. Like kids are meant to be out and moving and being with their friends, and that's what they want.
Yeah, I don't have any great insights on school bus policy, but I did just want to underline what Daniel said about shared spaces. And just two jurisdictions where I happen to be closely familiar with these policies in Washington, D.C. and Arlington, Virginia. Schools are not allowed to share facilities with public playgrounds, and kids who are not going to a school are not allowed to use their facilities during school hours. So we have in Arlington, for example, we have all of these cases of elementary schools with nice playgrounds and athletic facilities right across the street from really huge public parks that are like duplicating the exact same facilities. And we have a great park system. There's been literally one occasion in my experience of going to lots and lots of public playgrounds where I was like, there are actually too many people here. Like, we're going to leave because this is too crowded. Basically, every other visit would have been better if more kids were using the available space. So I think just, there are safety concerns about having shared spaces, but looking at these trade-offs, like, is it really worth that like little bit of added safety to dedicate all of this repeated space? I think is like low-hanging fruit in this policy discussion.
Yeah. If you don't mind, I have one piece about that, so the jargony term that for this is shared use, so shared use policies. And this is not legal advice, but typically the issue that people are talking about is liability. And there's ways to manage that at different levels. So, like, if this is something of interest and you're sort of in the position to be working on anything like that, I think looking further into questions around liability, and if you have questions specifically about this, please email me and I'll send you a whole bunch of stuff. But the whole question of liability can be a little bit of a way to shut down a conversation before you can move forward. And there's like liability is something to be managed. Again, not legal advice.
Awesome.
I think also sort of like what Emily is sort of saying, it's like we need to be treating these issues and like discussing them with constituents in like a more like respectful, literal way. Like, here are the trade-offs. Like we have this limited amount of space, we have this limited amount of resources. Do we want to spend this much and put the school out here and have this huge campus where we're going to have the roads and the pipes and all of this stuff? Or we can put it here, but then we're going to piggyback off the park and share those resources, and we're going to save this much money. And then parents, like, you're not going to have to drive your kids out to this farther school, and that's going to, a hidden tax on you. And so I think it is a very challenging like conversation to like bring people in, because infrastructure just like happens, roads just happen. Like we don't, most people like don't ask questions about it. But I think when we can sort of bring more people in to think about public space and then have those conversations with them in a more respectful way, where it's not like this is what, here's the trade-offs, here's what it's like in reality, what do you think we should do? I think people would come to their senses, because I think fiscally it's not the responsible one.
We got about 5 minutes left. I think we could take one more question, and then we'll wrap up.
I think Davida had her hand raised.
Mhm.
Well, I was just going to say, when Emily and Natasha, Yeah, when you were talking about liability and safety, I mean, I was imagining safety in quotes because I was just thinking, like, how safe is it to have all these cars driving around, people driving fast, people driving crazy, and gigantic cars not being able to see tiny little kids? I mean, we're exposing our children to all of that. The trade-off is supposedly they're more safe. It's just a comment, I guess, and I don't know how to say that to people because people really have it in their mind that being inside a car is the most safe place you can be. And that's the way that parents show their love for their children and protect their children. And I really hope things like what Coach Balto is doing can show a different perspective that you don't have to be inside a car with your kid right next to you as the default.
Yeah. I think this all comes down, I'm gonna channel my Brene Brown. This all comes down to vulnerability. And people just don't want to do things outside of the societal norm for fear of being critiqued or judged. And I love people who, are trying to organize their community and trying to create change that is, benefits children especially. But like, you have to be vulnerable. You have to put yourself out there. You got to take risks, and people don't want to do that. And so it boggles my mind, like principals who are against walking school buses or bike buses because they're like, oh, it's like unsafe, but it's like, but your staff are chauffeuring all these, like they're around all these cars and all this. Is like, is that safe? But like that's just socially like normal. If a teacher got hit in the school car line, oh, that just happens. But if a teacher or a kid got hit on a walking school bus, oh my God, what is going on? Like unfathomable.
Yeah. And just one comment about like social norms. I think what's interesting about this issue is that if you walk into a room full of decision makers who are like older, I don't know, like Gen Xers or and up, if you ask them how they got to school, so many of their hands will rise when you ask like if they walked or biked. And so like this is a concept that was socially normal and people can relate to and can value regardless of what like their other political values are. And so I think like when we're talking about this work and like knowing you guys are thinking about, parking and such like on a broader scale beyond schools, like school zones and the school framework are an interesting place and maybe like a more productive place to try things that might not be palatable in other places in like the city or town. Um, this whole idea of like framing what's normal and not. So I think it's just always a fact that I like to point out.
I love what you just said, and I want to kind of underline that along with the comment you made earlier, Natasha, about like this, like radicalizing people. Like you can people who don't realize that they care about urbanism or land use, like, but they like the school transportation issue is just such a microcosm, and people get it, because they've experienced the frustrations around it. Um, we're at 2:59 here, at least 2:59 in my time zone. I want to respect anyone's time who needs to go here. I don't know if any of our panelists have an answer to the question that Ariel just posted in the chat, about DOTs. If you want to stick around and want to answer that question, we certainly won't kick you out here at the hour.
I have to go, but Ariel, my answer is yes. And if you have more deets, just email me. So I have to hop off. But thank you, everybody. This was a great conversation.
Yeah, this was fun. Thank you.
Thanks. I have a quick thought on Ariel's question. Obviously, Natasha, don't want to hold you on.
That's
But I mentioned the case of South Carolina, where actually Governor Sanford a couple decades ago was very into the idea of making it possible to build schools in more walkable locations, and led the effort to get rid of their requirements for school site size. But the Department of Transportation state level requirements have not been reformed. And they have this crazy requirement that bus drop off has to be 600 feet away from the parking lot. So like just right there, you're talking about like a really huge school site. And he personally weighed in to get some of these state DOT requirements waived on a couple of school sites, but like we can't be expecting the governor to, personally lead an effort in every state to address these issues. So those transportation requirements are definitely a piece of the state level reform.
Thank you for that. Thanks to all of our panelists and to everybody for attending here. This was really enjoyed this conversation. Paula, I don't know if you had any your closing spiel that you like to do for our guests.
Yeah, well, I'm just going to wrap up officially the session. So thank you so much for panelists. Natasha just left, but thank you, Sam, and thank you, Emily, for being here. Thank you to the audience. I think it was a really exciting panel. I loved, and it was very, very insightful.